the director of the new School of Communication and Media, next on Carpe Diem. I'm Larry Londino, and we are delighted to welcome to Carpe Diem Merl Brown, the inaugural director of the School of Communication and Media here at Montclair State. Merrill comes with extensive professional experience in traditional and new media, as well as journalism education. A former business reporter for the Washington Post, he was founding editor-in-chief of MSNBC.com and was instrumental in the launch of Court TV. Merrill served as the first national editorial director of News for the 21st Century, a Carnegie Corporation Knight Foundation initiative on the future of journalism, and in that capacity helped expand a pilot into a 12-school program at Arizona State University, which I want to talk about a little bit later. Merrill, welcome to Carpe Diem and welcome to the university.
Pleasure to be here, Larry. Thank you.
Let's talk first about your professional background. You've pretty much, your background parallels the incredible revolution that we've seen over the last 20 or 25 years from a form of journalism that had one form of acquisition and distribution into another. Talk some about how it's changed for you as a professional journalist from your days as a print journalist to what you now do.
Well, I followed that path that you just outlined because it seemed very natural to me. In the 1970s, I was writing about technology extensively. Now long gone and forgotten stories like the breakup of the phone company and changes in regulation that enabled cable TV to grow. And from that writing perspective and being a journalist covering it, my career somewhat naturally moved into, in some ways you might say, the next fashionable thing. So I had wanted to be in cable television because I thought there was an enormous creative opportunity to invent new things as cable networks started to blossom. In 1994, I fell in love with the internet and actually quit my job to go off and become a consultant in it. One of my clients was NBC, another was Time Incorporated. I helped these companies very early on figure out at least the beginnings of a digital strategy. That led to my founding MSNBC.com and launching that. Took my life from New York to Seattle, where I lived for close to a decade, very much involved with the technology and digital media scene on the West Coast. So it's been a bit of a natural progression in many ways because I'm excited about innovation.
Let's go back. You were University of St. Louis undergraduate?
Almost. I was at Washington University in St. Louis, where I was involved in running the college newspaper with a number of great journalists. And
majored in journalism?
I majored in political science. I went to college thinking I was going to law school, fell in love with the newspaper, and took on journalism.
And worked extensively with the newspaper at the college?
I was one of the editors of the newspaper at school, yeah.
And what was the transition into the job world? Did you go directly to the Washington Post? Or?
No, I worked my way up in a very traditional way through the newspaper business. I started off at an afternoon newspaper, now a virtually extinct kind of product, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, a small market. Then advanced through the company that owns that newspaper, a company called Media General, to their Washington bureau. From there, I went to another extinct entity, the Washington Star, which was a great newspaper and is no more. And I went from the Washington Star to the Washington Post, as you mentioned before.
And your area was business with media in particular, or business in general?
I got very involved in covering regulatory agencies in general. So I wrote about environment, I wrote about Securities and Exchange Commission matters, and then started to focus on the FCC, the emergence of cable TV, the future of telecom, and that sort of thing. And
your background in this, you learned by doing, and your exposure to it?
Basically, you know, like all journalists who are excited about what they're covering, I got very involved and did lots of reading and spent lots of time trying to become better about that. But I also had some history as a kid in playing with computer software, and I learned a very early coding system called Fortran, now generally forgotten and part of the ancient past, but had a summer internship in the United States government actually in a computer project. So I had some history and all that and was always fascinated by new technology.
Yeah. Let's talk some about the msnbc.com, which has now become something else, but talk a little how that came about. You started as a consultant with NBC?
Yes, I was a consultant at the very beginning of NBC's
When are we
considering.
talking year-wise?
We're talking about 1995 now, the very early days of the internet, when doing anything on the internet was difficult. We publish second by second now on the internet, publishing once a day in 1995 for a big entity was challenging. So I helped them think through the internet and how to distribute their video and how to just get on the internet at the very early days. I was also involved with Time Incorporated on the print side, helping a couple of their titles, principally Time and Money, figure out a way to get to this new thing called digital distribution. And so I was involved in the thinking with NBC about how they should implement their brand new joint venture with the Microsoft Corporation.
You were here in the
I was
New
living
York
in
area?
metropolitan New York, yes.
Uh-huh.
I was helping them figure that out. They asked me to build as a consultant their initial website, which we named MSNBC. There was great uncertainty about what the optimal name was. And a lot of people didn't like 5 characters as a name, and it seemed awfully awkward. I'd walk around with an MSNBC hat in the early days, and people would ask me if that was the NBC Women's Network. Ms. NBC is how a lot of people read it. Times change, and now MSNBC rolls off the tongue like ESPN or anything else, but it was very awkward in the early days. And so I built that website and created their digital strategy, worked a lot also on the television proposition at the time with NBC management. And then they asked me to move to Seattle and run it, and we decided it should be Seattle so we could take it.
Why Seattle?
So that we could take advantage of the technology capabilities of Microsoft.
Okay.
One of the things that made the site successful early on is that we were able to really integrate Microsoft technology capabilities into what we were doing, and that gave us, certainly in those days, a huge competitive advantage.
Yeah. New media is the buzzword now. I think probably many of the people who are watching us really don't know, what are we talking about when we say new media? And is it new, or is it just simply the natural progression of things as the technology changes?
Well, it was new, and now, we're talking about a period in the mid-90s when we got a lot of this off the ground, so we're getting almost to the 20th anniversary of the consumer internet now. So it's not so new anymore, although things keep changing. What we're talking about is a level of integration and connectivity in people's daily lives that wasn't possible in the old days when media companies simply handed us content on a time basis. You watched the show at 8 o'clock, you watched Walter Cronkite or Huntley and Brinkley at 6:30. Things were all delivered in a one-way fashion. Today, all that is different. Everything's on demand. The notion of time and space has changed. And the internet creates extraordinary opportunities for new content initiatives and new content forms to develop. And that's been the blessing of having the internet in the media space.
It's an interesting concept. What about the effect that it has on the editorial process? Do you ever have concerns where we used to have a deadline where something had to be done and there was an editorial process, somebody would call somebody, they would send it in. Now that editorial deadline is virtually non-existent. Do you think that affects the overall content?
It absolutely does. If you just think about the last year and some of the big hiccups, shall we say, in journalism, many of them are about racing to publish material to the public, whether it's how the events in Libya in the past month have unfolded and the reality of all that, or various scandals about errors in media. A lot of that is because the competitive pressures and deadlines are not considered what they used to be. And so for journalism students and journalists, we have to be very, very careful that we reinforce the same historic standards about verification and accuracy that you and I grew up with.
Yeah. Let's talk a little court TV, and I'm particularly interested in it. When I was in graduate school, I wrote a paper on Canon 35, which prohibited, it was a federal law that prohibited cameras in the courtroom, and I was very interested in it. How did you get involved with court TV, and talk some about its evolution?
Well, Court TV was founded by Time Warner and a legal journalist entrepreneur named Stephen Brill, who had been running American Lawyer magazine very successfully. And I had known both parties to that undertaking. And Stephen asked me to come help him start it, and I was very excited to do so, because I thought there was a new form of programming called live and reality that was going to emerge with all this channel capacity on the cable dial, and I wanted to be part of that. And it was a fantastic experience on many levels. We invented a program form and also invented a lot of new talent that came out of our show, or our network, I should say. People like Star Jones, now a celebrity on ABC, was an attorney in Detroit who we noticed in the courtroom. We were watching her from New York, and she was so imposing, magnetic, and smart that we brought her to New York and created what is today this celebrity called Star Jones. And there are any number of people like that who kind of popped out of the courtroom. We also did a lot to change how you think about live TV. I mean, coverage of celebrated trials and the reality component of it is very different than what preceded it. So hopefully we laid a lot of groundwork for cameras in the courtroom, which I hope you and I believe are an important part of the American justice system.
Did you run into restrictions on what cases could be covered and not? I imagine there was a lot of legal entanglements to try and get the cameras in.
We had to both lobby state legislatures to modify their regulations about state court coverage and be very friendly with judges. We went in front of a lot of judges, hopefully in a very astute way, to persuade them that we were there to do this right and not there to do sensational journalism. So some significant percentage of what we did there was political, frankly.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the transition. What brings you to education? How did you decide that this was a direction now that you're going in? And particularly coming in here, as you've noted, you've been involved in startups of various initiatives. We're starting, this is brand new, this School of Communication and Media. What was the tripping point that you said, this is something that I'd like to do professionally now?
Well, you identified already one of the things that was attractive about it. In many ways, the school is a startup. The vision for it is something that we're all collaborating on together right now. And I do like startups where everybody's creative energy can be pulled together to create something new and different. And that's what I hope we're trying to do here. At Montclair State, we have great assets. We have people like you on the faculty who laid a great groundwork, certainly in television and radio production. We have great physical assets like the building we're sitting in right now. We have a spectacular location 12 miles from Manhattan. We sit in a rich media community. Montclair and surrounding towns, as you know, is a hotbed, if you will, of media, television production, music, advertising, talent. I hope we can capitalize on that. And I think being able to start off in media and journalism education without a lot of the premises that existing schools are somewhat stuck in is a real opportunity to think differently about how we teach students, what opportunities we give to students, and the role the university can play, a university, in our case Montclair State, can play in the media ecosystem of its community. We have a great opportunity here to make a difference for the citizens of New Jersey and give them the kind of coverage that they may not be getting from local media these days, and I'm hoping we could really make a difference in that regard as well.
What do you see as the challenges right now in terms of organizationally and from a curriculum standpoint? I realize you've just been here for a few weeks, but from what you've seen at this point, what do you see as the challenges?
Well, the challenges are severalfold. One is just the collaboration process. So for instance, in the communication school, we have great scholars, about Twitter, Facebook, and social media. They have a lot to offer the students who are taking television production courses, and the faculty, of course. I don't think we can be too smart or too savvy about where social media is taking us. So to get those kinds of different expertise collaborating together on curriculum matters to the benefit of both the students and faculty, and maybe even to the university, is a great challenge and a great opportunity. And at some level, it's teed up for us already because we have those great minds and great talents like yourself already in the institution.
I'm smiling because what you're pointing out is the challenge that has been faced by pretty much everybody. You have scholars on the one hand, you have people that have more practical stuff that they're doing, and trying to get the two of them to work together. It's not impossible, but it definitely is a challenge.
It's a challenge, but thankfully there's little baggage about it that exists already. And we start with a clean whiteboard, and I think we can pull it off.
What do you think? I know part of the idea of this school is to develop partnerships with various both private and public institutions and initiatives. Could you talk some about what would be an ideal setup for you, or the types of things that you would like to develop in these kinds of partnerships? Well,
the most important thing to develop, quite obviously, I think, is opportunities for the students. Opportunities for the students to both learn, but also to create meaningful journalism that, as I said a moment ago, can matter in the daily lives of local citizens and maybe even in the national journalism agenda. You mentioned the Carnegie Knight project called News 21. The project has done some very important investigative journalism based on the work of student journalists. In the case of News 21, they're generally graduate students. At Montclair State, we're working with undergraduate students, but I don't think there's a dramatic difference in that regard. We can give students the opportunity here, under people like yourselves and other faculty members, in partnership with local news organizations, we can give them an opportunity to really make a difference and get training at the same time. The most significant training I got as a college student was as an intern at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, where I went every day for a semester and just wrote stories all day long. We were lucky enough to have a director of training at the newspaper at the time, and he at that point would take my stories on paper and just mark them up and throw them back at me until I got it right. And we can do that here, but not only in a practice setting, but also in the reality of working for local news organizations. We can also, and some of the local news organizations have come to the school already, they need our resources. They need it for two reasons. One, because of the economics of the limitations of media these days, but also the smart ones recognize that 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and so forth actually have something to offer called a much different perspective on the world, and with web tools can do things that you and I can't do quite so easily. So there's a great opportunity for both us and the community and the news industry as well in New Jersey to do things differently.
How about the relationship that we've forged with NJTV and the New York stations in terms of radio and television? How do you see that fitting into the new school agenda?
It's a great opportunity both to sell, if you will, the capabilities of the school to the larger region. Having branding on a show that's broadcast throughout New York is a significant opportunity. But more importantly, we've only begun to tap what the role students can play would be, both in a digital version of the program you're referring to and also on air. We're only starting to get our arms around that. They have an enormous amount to do every day to get their show up every night. And hopefully next semester and in coming semesters, we'll see even more student and faculty work fully integrated into what they do.
Could we talk a little about the project that you initiated with Arizona State, some of the background on that? How did you get engaged and involved in it, and what did it entail?
I had done some work for the Carnegie Corporation. I actually did a study for them about how young people consume news, and became, as part of that, involved in an effort that the head of the Carnegie Corporation, Vartan Gregorian, had initiated to try to get journalism school deans talking more about their somewhat precarious future.
Just before you go on,
yeah.
What did you find out about how young people consume news?
Among the things I found out is that they are just as interested in consuming news as we were at their ages, but we did it much differently than they do. Social media, when I wrote this study, was just beginning. There are many different ways information is exchanged these days. Obviously, the newspaper isn't picked up and scanned in the same fashion it was when you and I were 20, but news is very important to 20 and 21-year-olds. They just get it differently on the fly through handheld devices, much differently than we did.
What about the comedy outlets for news, like Comedy Central? And my kids, The Onion is like their Bible,
right.
And they actually get news, and I'm always amazed when I'm talking to them about the accuracy of the news they're getting, even though it's done satirically.
Well, we had similar vehicles back in the day as well. I mean, Saturday Night Live originated a form of satire of the news, and that's been around for, what, 40 years now, 30 years now. You and I can go back and talk about Mort Saul and Lenny Bruce and whatever you'd like, but you know, satire around the news is a traditional form, and we were getting information, or at least a take on the world, from people like that going back to the 60s and so forth. So this is the contemporary version of that, Larry.
So you're talk some more about the project at Arizona State. You did this study for Carnegie, and then
I got involved with Vartan Gregorian in
who is the former president of one of the Ivy League
New York Library, a New York library, and before that Brown University.
Brown.
Today he runs the Carnegie Corporation.
Right.
And he was bringing deans together to help them think about where journalism education should go. And I helped facilitate and move that process forward. And then when the initiative was ultimately created by a handful of schools, Columbia, Harvard, Berkeley, USC, and Northwestern, they asked me to be the editorial director of it and help create a graduate program that would both influence curriculum at the universities and also train their students in a summer program about how to do big project, exciting journalism, digitally based.
How did you train them? You brought from other institutions and this was at Arizona State using their facilities?
It wasn't at Arizona State yet. When it was the original 5 schools, I set up 5 programs at each of those schools, or actually 4 of the schools, for the 5 schools. And then it was thought to be so successful that Carnegie Unite stepped up, added some more money to the program, expanded it to 12, as you mentioned, and looked for a permanent home and a permanent executive director for it, and wound up placing it at the Walter Cronkite School at Arizona State University in Phoenix.
And that's the pilot project itself now, and is it still being used at other institutions, the curriculum that you developed?
Well, I wouldn't want to overstate that. It's now some years later, and the curriculum development process has advanced significantly. Mm-hmm. You know, the program helped jumpstart that, but it's well along. Things are much more developed than they were 10 years ago in terms of the integration of digital skills into journalism training at many, many universities.
2 more things, and then we'll let you go. One, what do you see as the future of journalism if you were looking into the crystal ball? Number 1, what do you think practically is going to happen? And number 2, what's your opinion about whether it's going to be better or worse?
Well, we certainly have more journalism today than ever before, and that ultimately will be a good thing as long as the disciplines that we talked about earlier about accuracy and verification continue to be taken as seriously as I'm sure you and I believe they need to be. We have a flowering of new organizations, new news institutions, new blogs, new hyperlocal sites that creates enormous opportunity for people, for students at universities like this one. So I'm optimistic about the volume of journalism for sure. What I'm troubled about in particular is when you look at, for all that material that's out there, when you look at the coverage of things like the current presidential campaign, I frankly don't believe it could be much worse. There's an enormous amount of navel gazing that people like you and I engage in the December period after every presidential campaign, where we sound perplexed and disappointed at how bad the coverage is, and then outline a series of initiatives that hopefully will improve it. And then what happens is we fall into the same rotten traps. And I must say, I'm so disappointed by the mainstream media coverage of this campaign and how little attention is being devoted to substantive issues. It's just another indictment of what rotten shape we're in, and institutions like this, like Montclair State, really need to step up and help this problem get solved.
And that's a perfect transition into my last question, which is, what do you want to see us do here differently that will have an effect on changing that landscape that you're talking about?
Well, I hope the school will stand for something like three things. One is being as contemporary as we can be in how we train students, and make sure, as we started to discuss before,
in terms of the technology,
in terms of the
techniques,
disciplines working together, so that everybody comes out of here understanding what a flash application is, understanding what a basic story construct is, understands at least something about, you know, how to make video interesting, so that the multi-discipline training that journalists need in the brave new world we're in actually is a core part of what we teach them. The second thing is, and we talked about this before, I want to make sure the hub that is Montclair State for programming like the nightly news show we do here is a resource for them, and they appreciate what it takes to put together a half-an-hour newscast. A lot of people on the outside believe a couple of guys sit in front of a camera and read a script and that's a show. I
always say, look at the credits at the end, how many people are involved.
Well said. That's a terrific point.
Look at the number of people that are involved. Real quick.
Yes.
I just wanted to mention before we close, first of all, thank you for being here, but you will also, in inaugurals, you will get your first credit on Carpe Diem, which will be a weekly thing. So I want you to notice when we're running the credits tonight. Merrill, thank you very much for stopping by and talking with us. It's fascinating for me, and I think for our audience as well.
Thank you, Larry.
If you'd like more information about this or any other Carpe Diem, you can write to us at the email address on your screen, carpediem@montclair.edu, or call us at 973-655-5158 for Carpe Diem. I'm Larry Londino, and thanks for watching.